Hi guys, welcome back to yet another fun DIY sailboat refit video here about good old Athena. In the last couple of days before I started recording this video, I've already made a little bit of progress in the forward cabin. I've finally finished sealing the supports for the wooden slats that's going to go here in the V-berth, and I've also finished painting the inside of all of the lockers. Last week I put up the headliner above the V-berth, and this week I've also put up another little section of headliner. It might not look like much, but this took the better part of a day. It's a little bit of an odd shape, and there are some cutouts I had to make there. Those were kind of tricky. And then the first piece of plywood I put up, it kind of broke when I tried forcing it up there. So yeah, it was a right pain in the behind. This week, I'd like to start varnishing the trim here over the V-berth. The varnish is supposed to show up tomorrow. I'd also like to get the nest of wires in here in the clothing locker figured out. That's everything that's connected up in the mast. And I want to wire all of that up using a spiffy digital switching box from Czone. And that is this box right here. Digital switching in its simplest form is basically just some relays controlled over the NMEA 2000 network. This box from Czone is called an output interface, and it does just that, but it also does much, much more. I am still a digital switching noob, so I'm sure there are some features inside of this little guy that I'm not familiar with yet. But so far, I believe this guy can remotely turn on and off circuits from either a chart plotter or physical switches, although that requires another box, which is right over here. I should also be able to get an alarm if the current draw on any of these 6 circuits here go below or above a threshold I set. So that means, for instance, for nav lights, if this guy is controlling a nav light and one of them dies, well, then this guy will alert me that that nav light has died. From messing around with the software that's used for configuring this guy, it also seems like there are some timing capabilities and some dimming capabilities, and also the option of setting a software fuse for a circuit. It also looks like we can do a little bit of logical or conditional switching. We can look at some of the PGNs flowing around on the NMEA 2000 network and do stuff based on that. It is all very exciting, and I'm super excited to start playing with this stuff. But for now, I am still very much a noob. My plan for this little guy is to let him control everything that's mounted on the mast. So that means the radar, the AIS transponder, nav lights, stuff like that. Now, by having this guy near the mast, it also means I only have to run 2 wires in there instead of 7 to be able to switch everything on and off. And it means that I'll be able to control, for instance, the nav lights or the radar directly from the chart plotter out in the cockpit. So there's no need to come down below to turn on the circuit to get the radar fired up. I am sure there's somebody out there right now screaming at their screen, but Mass, wait! What if your box of fancy magic breaks? How are you going to be able to turn on the radar if that happens? Well, fear not, my dear viewer. There is a hardware override for each of the circuits. In the unlikely event that the circuit board inside of this guy lets out the magic smoke, all I'll have to do is to pull this cover off of the box and move these ATO fuses up into the top position here, and that will override the box. Like I mentioned, this box is called an output interface. There's also a different Czone box that I'm going to use for controlling the interior lights here inside of the boat. That is called a Contact 6 Plus, and it'll be arriving next week. The Contact 6 Plus box is about half the price of the output interface, but it doesn't have all of the cool features this one does. For instance, with the Contact 6 Plus, you can't get alarms for circuits like you can on the output interface. But for interior lighting, I don't really care about the alarms, and the Contact 6 Plus will still allow me to dim the lights using the box, which is really cool. The other box I've got here on the table is the Switch Control Interface. This box will allow me to use physical switches to control the circuits on the output interface and also the Contact 6 Plus. I haven't fully decided where I'm going to mount the switch control interface yet, but the Contact 6 Plus and the output interface are both going to get mounted in here inside of the clothing locker. It is very cramped in here, so let me just get everything tidied up and get the output interface wired up, and then we can take a closer look. It's the next day. It was a little bit cramped working inside of the clothing locker, but it all worked out. As you can hopefully tell, things in here are looking a little bit more tidy now. I've labeled all of the wiring in here, so it should be easy for me to figure this out again in 6 months when I need to change something. I did that using this label maker and some of this special heat shrink doodad here, which comes out looking like this. There's not really anything fancy going on in here. All of the wiring from the mast comes down here. All of the connections to or from the chart table comes up here. I've got a couple of bus bars here and a fuse holder, and well, that's about it. I want to switch out the bus bars I've got in there with some that are covered, just because it is a hanging locker and I don't want anything to accidentally short out the 2 bus bars. That would be pretty horrible, but yeah, this is plenty fine for now. But let's get back to the output interface. As you can see, I've hooked up the NMA 2000 network and I've hooked up my 6 circuits here. I've already configured 5 of those 6 circuits, but I figured I'd save the last one so I could show you guys the configuration tool. I've got my computer hooked up to the NMA 2000 network using this Master Vault USB gateway. You do need a compatible USB gateway to be able to program the CZone stuff, and this is the cheapest option I'm aware of. As far as configuration tools goes, this is actually pretty decent, but let's go ahead and add a new load to the system, and that is going to be the deck light. I've given it a name and I've set the fuse at 1 amp. And that's all we really need to do here. If we go into circuits, we should be able to see our deck light has a circuit control here named All Display Interfaces, and that is all we really need to do. So now it's just a matter of hitting Write Config to Network. Up here you can see the chart plotter is now reading the configuration from the network, and it is done. It is worth knowing that when you add a new circuit and a new control to the network, it doesn't automatically show up on this page here on a Garmin chart plotter. You have to go into the menu and Setup, Edit Page, Edit Switches, and then you have to add the switch you just created. So that is the deck light one. And back, and back, and back, and back. Now you can see that there is a 6th option here. That is the power deck light switch. If I hit this, it's going to turn green up there, meaning the deck light is now on. And wouldn't you know it, the indication LED here on number 6 has turned on the output interface. And if we take a peek up the mast, ta-da! The deck light is on. I can see how this doesn't seem super impressive, especially because the chart plotter is right next to the distribution panel. So turning on the circuit over here instead of over here is not super impressive. But we're also going to have a chart plotter up here in the cockpit, and that means I can turn on any of those circuits without having to come down below. That's pretty cool. What I've shown you here is the bare bones version of digital switching. We can do plenty more cool stuff with this technology, and I consider this the first step in my journey. The next step is going to happen, well, next week when the Contact 6 Plus box shows up and I can get the interior lights hooked up to that. But now to something completely different, varnishing. The varnish showed up earlier today, but I think it might not be doing too well because it was super cold when I got it, and I'm worried that UPS might have left it sitting in a car overnight and it got down to minus 15 degrees Celsius last night. So if that's the case, well, then I don't know if this stuff is usable. So my first step is going to be to make a little test to see if this is actually still good to use. I've never used any of these products here before, but this stuff here, the Fast Dry Clear Wood Sealer, is supposed to be a much faster way of varnishing. The thing I despise the most about varnishing is waiting. It can take a lot of time to build up the number of coats. With other types of varnish, like for instance this stuff here, you have to wait almost 24 hours in between coats, and if you want to build up 6 or 7 or 8 coats, well, that's gonna take a week. This is supposed to be much faster. And this stuff comes highly recommended by my paint guru Jason, which you might remember from such previous hits as painting the top sides. So I figured, why not give it a go? But before we give it too much of a go, let me just make a little sample and we'll leave that overnight to see if it cures okay, to see if I can actually use this. And if I can, well, then tomorrow we get started varnishing some of the trim in the forward cabin. It is the next morning and the wood sealer has cured perfectly. That is a big relief. For a second, I thought I was stuck with 10 liters of wood sealer that would be unusable, but everything looks good. Now, to make sure that this one component varnish is also still good, I am going to make another little test on top of this and just apply a little bit of this, and then tomorrow we'll see if this has cured. But that doesn't mean that I can't apply this stuff today. Jason recommended to apply a single coat of epoxy before applying the wood sealer if you're going to be using the wood sealer anywhere where there's water on a regular basis. But where I'm going to be using this is nice and dry, so I'm just going to go with the wood sealer. The areas I'm going to be working on today is the trim here on the lockers, this opening into the chain locker, and also all of the doors for these lockers over the V-berth. I'll start up here, then I'll work my way around, then once all of this is taken care of, then we'll get to the doors. And for the doors, I've prepared these little spiky doohickeys. I don't care that much about the finish on the back here, so I'm okay with 4 tiny little dimples from these screws poking out here. And this means I can varnish both sides at the same time. But first I am going to have to prep the surface. As you can see, there is a little bit of dust hiding in here. That is no good. So first up, a bit of surface prep. Well, sometimes plans change. I was planning on painting everything except the trim and the doors, but I'd mixed up too much of the wood sealer and I decided just to use it. For the rest of the boat, I'm a big fan of painted plywood and varnished trim, like here in the galley. But for the V-berth, I think it might be nice to have it be a little bit dark and cozy. You guys don't get to see it, but Ava and I typically spend a lot of time talking about the various projects here aboard the boat, figuring out solutions and stuff like that. So why don't we give her a call and see what she thinks about varnishing the V-berth instead of painting it. I've already sent Ava some photos, so that she would see what she thinks. Hey, my lovey.
I hate it.
Oh, great.
Just kidding. I like it.
Okay. But there's something we need to decide though. If we're gonna varnish all of this, then we have to transition into paint somewhere because we can't varnish the clothing locker. It doesn't have the same outer veneer as the rest of the forward cabin.
Okay.
So where do you think we should transition to paint rather than varnish?
Let me look at the picture. So, what about where the bulkhead is? And where the V-berth is?
Okay, so I'm just gonna flip the camera. So have this be the transition. So have this side be varnished and this side be painted?
Yeah, because there's more trim on that side, right? Like throughout the rest of the forward cabin?
Well, there's not a lot of trim in this area here. There's gonna be a door here and the door fronts are gonna be varnished.
Right, so that'll have some varnish on it, so it won't all just be like white.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay, well, then that's what we'll do.
I like it.
It looks like I've got a bit of varnishing to do in my future. There's also all the wooden mahogany slats that's going to go on the bottom half where the hull is exposed right now. So yeah, quite a bit of varnishing, but I don't mind because this wood sealing stuff is pretty easy to use. As you can see by my exposed head, meaning no hat, I've cranked the heat here inside of the boat, and the minimum overcoating interval for this stuff right now is around 3 to 4 hours. So that means I can do 4 coats of this stuff in a day. From a durability standpoint, I don't need to sand in between coats. It will get rid of any little imperfections, so it will provide a nicer finish in the end, but from a durability standpoint, I don't actually need to sand in between coats. I'll leave the forward cabin alone for the next 3 to 4 hours so I can apply another coat. And that means I can get the heck out of these fumes because this stuff does smell horrible, and there are some pretty bad warning labels on here. So Yeah, I'm gonna vamoose. I got 3 coats of the wood sealer applied in the forward cabin yesterday. It's looking pretty good, but I definitely want to sand before I add a 4th coat just to knock down the little imperfections. The TDS recommends using 320 grit for sanding in between coats. Unfortunately, I am out of 320 grit and it'll take a few days for the stuff I've ordered to get here. Once I've applied the last coat of wood sealer and I'm happy with the finish, the final coat is going to be this stuff, Gold Spar Satin, because personally I prefer a satin finish over a glossy finish. I should be able to finish varnishing the stuff I've started this week, next week, and speaking of next week, the freezer was supposed to show up next week. It's gonna go in this area here, which is kind of the last big piece of the puzzle that is the forward cabin. But unfortunately, the website I've ordered it from have not been able to come up with a estimated date for delivery. In fact, they haven't even responded to my email, which makes me think it's probably not gonna show up. That is a right pain in the behind, because short of building the freezer area here, all I need to do for me to be able to move into the forward cabin is to finish varnishing, finish painting, and finish putting up the wooden slats in the V-berth. Of course, I will keep plugging away, but it is getting more and more difficult to work around not having the freezer here. I really hope the freezer is going to show up next week. If it does, then I'll get started building the freezer area. If it doesn't, then I'll continue varnishing the V-berth. I'll see if I can get my hands on the mahogany slats and start varnishing those too. And there's also the Contact 6 Plus box that's going to show up, so we can get the lighting wired up. So yeah, there's going to be something going on next week, but I just really hope the freezer is going to show up. And on that hopeful note, I hope to see all of you guys back here aboard Athena next week for yet more DIY fun. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like. See you!